Welcome to the Good Divorce Show, where we can help you learn how to navigate the journey of divorce with less conflict, less debt, and equip you not to just get divorced, but also learn how to be divorced. Your host, certified divorce coach Karen McMahon, shares her wealth of knowledge, gets advice from other relationship experts, and interviews couples who learn how to have a good divorce, so you can too. Now here's your host, Karen.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Good Divorce Show. I am Karen McMahon, your Good Divorce Coach, and I am delighted today to be chatting with one of the pioneers of the industry of helping families find a new journey through this often challenging and disorienting, quite honestly, journey of divorce and reorientation. Today, we are chatting with Karen McMahon. She is a high conflict divorce strategist, certified divorce coach, and founder of the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. She began divorce coaching in 2010 after recognizing that the pain of her own divorce led her on a transformational journey into a powerful and unexpected new life. Karen still leads today a national team of divorce coaches in supporting men and women around the world to become calm, clear, and confident as they navigate their own divorce. Karen is also the host of the acclaimed Journey Beyond Divorce podcast and co-author of Stepping Out of Chaos, Turning Pain to Possibility. I am eager to hear about all the possibilities. Welcome to the Good Divorce Show, Karen McMahon.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we're the double Karens today. In fact, the double Karen mix.
Okay.
As I shared in your introduction a bit here, Karen, the idea that many of us come to this work through our own journey. Would you mind sharing just a couple of the stepping stones that brought you to this work? You've been involved over a decade. You are one of the pioneers in a movement to help people see their way through the divorce, not just through a lawyer, but through coaches, through resources, through books. So what brought you to the conversation?
Yeah, as with most of us, my divorce really threw me on my ear. My divorce was high conflict. My marriage was high conflict. My kids were 4 and 6 when I sat them down to tell them I had decided to divorce Daddy. My divorce then lasted 3.5 brutal years. I lived in the attic. There was chaos and conflict. The police were involved. The CPS got involved. We had to hire an attorney for the children and a custody forensic. So like the whole kit and caboodle, the whole fat mess of it. And what I like to say is it was a living hell and the greatest gift I was ever given all at once.
Oh my goodness. And I just actually want to pause there for our listeners, because so often those of you listening who are in your living hell and you think it will be that way forever, and we are here to remind you it is temporary and it's real. We're not dismissing it, but it is not a permanent state and you can come out the other side. And so hearing from someone who had the whole kit and caboodle, and maybe give us a little bit of how, when you say it was one of my greatest gifts, how could you possibly say something about so traumatic and so difficult?
Yeah, it's such a great question. To the point that you just made, the mantra that I carried for 3.5 years and used hundreds of times on certain days was "This too shall pass." Like I needed a rope to believe that it was temporary because it seemed anything but temporary as days and weeks and months just dragged on. So while all of that ugliness happened, and not a whole lot legally happened over 3.5 years, actually. So it's really for those of us who go through these really long-term high conflict ones, it's an emotional journey is what it is. And so over the course of that time, I was able to take my eyes off of my displeasing soon-to-be ex and start looking at what I brought to the table. And that's hard to do, especially when you're dealing with kind of bullying and feeling diminished. However, it's the only way to do it. It's the brilliant way to do it because I was able to see that because of my own family of origin, I came to the table with codependency, with people pleasing, with fear, and of not being loved or unworthiness. And all of these were elements that played into the dysfunctional dance. It's never just on one side of the dance floor. And so for me, I did not know of a divorce coach, but I went into a 12-step program. I got myself a therapist. I got my kids a therapist. And so you can go through the pain or you can grow through the pain. Why just go through it and be the same person on the other side when you can grow through it and be a transformed, what I like to say, healed and refined version of yourself. And I went from feeling so filled with self-doubt and insecurity to feeling really actually liking myself and feeling good about myself. And I thought, if that was the fire of refinement that I had to go through to get where I am today, I called my best friend and I said, I'd do it all over again on a dime. I've never felt so good about myself.
That is extraordinary. And this mantra, I love, we can grow through it. It's not just suffering through it, but what are we going to learn on the other side of it? And my sense is that is a big piece of the service and the practice that you and your team of coaches bring to those who are in the kit and caboodle. Tell us a little bit about how you would approach the high conflict journey with your clients and this idea of how we're going to grow through it. If you will, what's on the buffet of services? And again, I think often as we head towards divorce, most of us, like, we don't even know what questions to ask. We don't know what we might need. And typically what we get from the social narrative is like, just call a lawyer and get digging into that. But there is so much more to the story. So your services of buffet to help people grow through, what would it include?
Yeah, and I think that to your point, people think of divorce as a legal journey, but there's so much more to it, and the emotional part of it is so vitally important. So I've worked with people 2, 4, 10 years post-divorce who weren't emotionally divorced yet, who were still focusing on what he or she did to them and how they're at fault for the client's current life. And so a lot of what we're doing is saying, we want to give you all of the information and guidance and sounding board and support for the logistics, my finances, my co-parenting, my scheduling, my legal choices, all of that. You can't do that well if you are dysregulated, if you are filled with anger and bitterness, or if you're filled with fear and paralysis. And so we really start people, especially people who are coming to us and they're coming out of years or decades of a really high conflict situation. So the first thing I know for certain is I'm not really talking to you because your spouse has completely usurped the space between your ears. And so much of what comes out of your mouth is going to be his or her perspectives of you, condemnation of you. Your fears of the process are going to be based on what they told you it's going to be. And so the first thing we really work with people on is reclaiming their mind and helping them to see that they've got someone squatting in their mental space and it's not serving them. It's not their beliefs or values or perspectives. And so, and they don't even realize it at first. I was just speaking to someone yesterday for the first time, and she started talking about something, and I could hear it right away. It actually wasn't her belief. And when she realized it, it was like such an aha for her. So in those early stages, really helping you reclaim your mental space and reroot yourself in your beliefs and values. And that in and of itself is a game changer and will begin to rebuild confidence and that sense of empowerment that we want people to feel in a process where you're so out of control with so many things. You can feel so empowered when you're focusing on yourself.
Absolutely. And I love this image of someone is squatting in your mind, which means they're not invited.
Right.
And that we can empower ourselves to say, no, thank you. I'm done with that narrative. I no longer want the evil twin in my head. You are not paying rent here. You're out. I'm evicting.
Right.
And there is such a mindset and really a mind game And again, some of the shame that comes from the social outside, and this idea that, we're broken, we're wrong, we've got ourselves into this mess, and that we don't, as a society, always recognize divorce as a death and a grief experience. I always say, if my grandma had died or my parent, someone would have showed up at my door with a casserole.
Yeah.
But instead, I'm inside on the kitchen floor just trying to figure out how to feed myself. And so the isolation of divorce can really be debilitating as well.
Yeah, and I would say with that, like the thing that each of us absolutely need to bring to the table in every conversation that your listeners hear around divorce is self-compassion and gentle kindness. Because regardless of what kind of a divorce you're going through, between feeling guilty or shameful or I'm a failure or I should have been able to, when you bring gentle kindness and self-compassion to the table, you immediately levitate yourself energetically. So shame, guilt, fear, regret is very heavy, and it kind of pushes us into the basement, whereas self-compassion and gentle kindness like emotionally levitate us up, which is where we want to be so that we can go through this hard journey.
Beautiful. In fact, there is a client of yours that you had mentioned to me about her finding her voice and even sitting at the table with the legal team, with the soon-to-be ex, and brought the wisdom into the conversation to really command her voice again. Would you unpack that story as an illustration for others to learn from?
Yeah, so this is an older client of mine. She had been married for, I think, 36 years. And her situation was such that spouse was in the medical field. They were financially very comfortable, but she was on an allowance for 36 years. And she actually never got to see what the income was. He would put his hand over it while she signed the tax return. And her
Wow.
part in this was she was a grown woman, but she allowed this. So when we first began to meet, she felt very guilty and shameful, very meek. Um, uh, and had this belief of her soon-to-be ex as this just big, wonderful human being. And as we went through it, all of the high conflict, all of the shenanigans, all of the lack of transparency and the manipulation and the court orders and this whole hot mess. And at one point in the last quarter of this whole thing, he pulled another thing out of his hat, and her whole legal team like got chaotic. And she had grown so much, had become so clear, so tuned in, that she was the one to say, hold on, everyone. Let's take a beat. There's nothing to do right now. It's just more chaos. Let's let the weekend go by. Let's take a breath and let's see if there's actually anything to do. And so when she called me and told me this, I was like, girlfriend, like you just managed the team that has been managing you, and you're the one who brought the calm and the rationality and the slowing everything down to the table. And that could only happen because of the incredible amount of work she had done on herself.
Absolutely extraordinary. And this is a great illustration of the growing through. Could you pinpoint anything in your work with that client that, again, if we're thinking about what are the skills that we need to build, it sounds like that regulation to be able to kind of stand out of yourself, but some real practical thought process or skill building for those that are listening and thinking, I can't even imagine bringing my voice or managing those, or those that are really stuck in the victim mindset.
Yeah, so in the beginning, in the early stages, one of the big steps we work with people on is calming the chaos, whatever your chaos is. And so that's really becoming crystal clear on when do I get triggered and why do I get triggered? And when he or she is poking at my tender underbelly, what is my belief in myself? And so what we do is we get really granular so that they understand. So there might be a fear story. So then we talk about fact and fiction. Well, if you stick with the facts instead of the opinions, the interpretations, the assumptions, all of that, if you just stick with the facts, what does that tell you? And so all of these little tools and strategies and baby steps help people stand more and more in taking a beat, enjoying the pause, and really determining whether or not they're in my boundary course. I talk about, just because you're invited to the argument doesn't mean you have to attend. If you do have to attend, do you have to attend right now? If you have to attend right now, what do you actually have to say? And so these are like so granular when you slow things down. And I know you do a lot of the similar work. And so all of a sudden, what used to be this hot mess of a chaotic conflict, well, just when you control yourself and you remain quiet, everything calms down. And then you go from your amygdala to your frontal cortex, right? So now you actually have access to your rational brain and you can start thinking again, because when you're triggered, you're just in fight, flight, or freeze.
That's right. And this idea of you've been invited to the argument, but that doesn't mean you have to accept the invitation or right now, and how you show up, and really managing and knowing that we have personal agency. And I think those emotional hijackings, and because it's so personal, that spouse, if there's children involved, like, it is easy to boom, hit right into that amygdala, that limbic protect, which we're not saying it's bad. It's important. It is what keeps us safe, but we don't want it to rule us.
And I think what triggers people so often isn't necessarily the behavior, it's this story behind the behavior. He dropped the kids off late just to get on my nerves. She did this thing just because. And so it's the fiction that drives us nuts. The fact is the fact, right? And then the other thing that I'll say in terms of tools is there's a huge pivot when you go from resisting how you or your spouse show up to accepting it. And so whether you have a spouse who explodes or who stays out late or who drinks or who spends too much money or what have you, whatever that trigger is, once you say, okay, this is how they are, I know this is how they are, they've been this way for years, then you get to ask yourself, why do I get surprised? Why don't I love this saying, why don't I expect and accept what I know this human being does? Then I have so much more agency to actually make choices around it than always being like, I can't believe. How could you possibly? Well, because they did for the last 20 years. That's why.
Right. And our former spouse is the same person as our now ex-spouse. And
You weren't going to change them during the marriage. You're certainly not changing them during the divorce.
that's right. But we can dismiss some of those reactions.
Yeah.
So much wisdom coming to us today from Karen McMahon. She is a high conflict divorce strategist, certified divorce coach, and founder of the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. And when we get back, we're going to chat a little bit more also about your book, Stepping Out of Chaos, Turning Pain to Possibility, as we continue to help you listeners come on back to the Good Divorce Show. I'm Karen McNenny, your Good Divorce Coach. Stay tuned.
Are you thinking about getting divorced? Before you call a lawyer, call the Good Divorce Coach, Karen McNenny, a certified divorce counselor, co-parenting specialist, and mediator. Karen's signature Good Divorce experience will guide you through your divorce journey, from the day you make that difficult decision to the day the decree is signed, all for a predictable fee. The Good Divorce Coach will teach you and your partner how to get divorced and be divorced with less conflict and less debt. Visit thegooddivorcecoach.com to get in touch with Karen.
Now, back to the show with Karen.
Hello and welcome back to the Good Divorce Show. I am your Good Divorce Coach, Karen McNenny. Thanks for staying with me today as we chat with wise pioneer of the divorce journey, Karen McMahon. She is a high conflict divorce strategist and a certified divorce coach, as well as the founder of the Journey to Beyond Divorce podcast, as well as leading a cadre of coaches serving people around the world as they move through specifically high conflict divorce, which we don't always get a chance to talk about here on the Good Divorce Show. But I think sometimes hearing the hard stories helps us to know how to avoid said stories. As we pursue our own good divorce. And even though you find yourself really embedded in these high divorce stories, Karen, in part because of your own high divorce conflict, and as you shared in the first segment, you had the whole kit and caboodle. It from top to bottom, you can guide people because it really is a case of been there, done that. And yet, you and I are both committed to helping people find a better life on the other side of divorce. So, from your perspective, what does make a good divorce? What are some of the things we can be thinking about through the journey in order to have a more healthy divorced life? If we couldn't do it well in marriage, maybe we can do it well in divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And it's so important. So for me, regardless of how high the conflict is, the kids come first. And part of it is supporting my client in understanding that regardless of what the other parent is saying or doing, their responsibility is to always put the children first, before their needs, before the other parent's needs. And when you have a child-centric divorce, when there are children involved, you're already on the right path. And then the other thing we were talking about earlier is really looking at your communication style. So if you're conflict avoidant, or if you come from a family that yells and screams a lot, and that's your way of communicating, adjusting your communication to allow for the best possible outcome. And I always like to remind clients that we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And that communication, a big part of good communication is being an active listener and being able to reflect back so that you're actually having the same conversation, because as you know, so often there's 2 different conversations going on. So I would say child-centric, really good communication. And then in my humble opinion, a good divorce is a divorce that leaves all parties healed and refined on the other side of the process. And so if you can emerge without bitterness in your heart towards your ex, that's not only going to help if you have a co-parenting relationship, but it's also going to help your relationship with your kids, and it's going to help any romantic or other relationships you have going forward. And so when we clear that stuff out and we can move forward more conscious of what we're bringing to the table, and more intentional, I truly believe, and so many of my clients have said that their best chapter was the one after their divorce, after a good divorce, even a high conflict divorce, that was good.
That's right. Good does not mean easy.
Yeah.
An absence of difficulty. Not to be underestimated, but can we do it in such a way that we don't blow up the whole family on the way out the door? And even though the marriage is ending, the family does carry on if there's children involved. And I know your clients, my clients don't always involve children, but often that's the case. And often those are the families that need the most help and support. There's sort of a beauty of not being connected through children because you can sever, amputate, and move on. And you don't have to talk every week about who's running the hockey shuttle, who's got the dance shoes, how are we going to do the birthday next month, right? You have to be in constant conversation. So finding a pathway towards that is certainly in the best interest of the kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I would suspect in a high conflict divorce, when your soon to be ex is poking, prodding, fighting, battling, betrayal might be present, that it is just so easy to turn to your child at any point and say, well, let me tell you what your mother, father did. Well, you only have half the story. Like, there is a part of us that wants our children to have the whole picture, to maybe empathize with us, to come on our side of the table. So where are the dangers in that, and how do we avoid it? Because so often those mean-spirited jabs towards the parents can involve the children to the detriment of the children.
Yeah, it's just the worst thing that you can do. First of all, when you criticize the other parent, your child, if it's a biological child, that's a part of them. So you're actually, so believe it or not, you're criticizing them, and they know that mom is a piece of me, dad is a piece of me. And so for that reason, you don't want to do it. The other thing is, it's such a huge transition. And when we put those kind of adult issues on our children's shoulders, it can cause anxiety, it can cause depression, it can cause a lot of mental health issues, which is not what any of us want. And then I would say, most importantly, I it is so important to me as a parent that I have trust and communication with my kids, because in today's day and age, there's a lot that our children, even young adults and adults, go through. If you're going to tell the child what's wrong with the other parent, you're breaking the bridge of trust and communication. And if actually they need you, or they want to rely on you and talk to you about something with the other parent, you've blown it, because you're not safe. And so the best thing that we can do is grace and dignity. If there's something about that other parent that the child needs to know, let them find it out in their own good time. They will. But to be the person to put that on their shoulders is only going to do harm, both to your relationship with them as well as to their relationship maybe with the other parent. So yeah, I would say keep your side of the street clean, build bridges of communication and trust, don't blow them up. And that's going to help everyone be better on the other side.
Yes, I've heard some of our colleagues say you need to love your children more than you hate their parent, their
Yeah.
other parent. And that is a high ask on some days. We get it. It is not always easy to find the high road and to offer grace to those that have really hurt us and where we feel that betrayal.
So if I could just share a tiny personal story, my ex was very angry throughout the entire 3.5 years, and he kind of broke every rule. Like, whatever the don't was, he did. And so my very little kids, pre-grade school, early grade school, just were given earfuls about custody and my faults and money and everything. And I wouldn't, they'd come to me and they'd want to know, like, what's your side? And I refused. I was like, this is adult information. And they were angry at me and they took dad's side. And my daughter is now 25. And 2 or 3 years ago, we have a very good relationship. And she came to me and she was like, I am so, so sorry.
No.
Like, you didn't say anything. And I believed dad's narrative. And it took me a lot of years to see on my own what was real. And it was this beautiful moment, but it was a long time in the coming.
Mhm.
And yet I've got young adults who trust me implicitly, and we have beautiful communication. And had I blown that up so that she could, in her pigtail years, know that, I wasn't the bad parent, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, and that is such a great reminder, Karen, that the story is long.
Yeah.
It has a long, long arch. We don't know how it will be written, but we are in charge of every page along the way. And children will grow into their own knowledge as young adults and adults. And I think as they come into their own marriages and their own parenting experiences, then the reflection of what mom and dad were going through as when they were a child of divorce becomes informed. We don't have to get ahead of the story.
Well put. Well
Yeah.
put. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the heat of the moment when your clients are in conversation with their lawyers. And we know that lawyers are trained and we hire and enlist their services to protect us, to fight for us, if you will. And I think there sometimes can be a belief out there that, lawyers can do more damage, or can, they cannot always, they may be acting on behalf of their client, but not on behalf of the whole family or that future. And knowing that the majority of your clients are all going to be partnered in lawyers and going to be in negotiations, in mediation rooms, sometimes even in the courtroom, how could you give us some, or what would be some of the wisdom about what to watch for as you're interviewing lawyers? And I always say it's like going and getting a new pair of shoes. Don't just put on one pair and walk out of the store. Most of us are going to try on a few pairs and really look for good fit. So what would be some of your criteria of what makes good fit?
Yeah. I like to think of the relationship with the attorney as one of your first significant relationships as you step into divorce. And so you want to do it well, and you want to maybe do it differently. And so for my clientele, who, you want to be seen and heard and respected. And so when you ask questions, are they just telling you stories, or are they hearing your question and really making sure that you're receiving what you need? And a lot of times, even my clients step into divorce and say, I want an amicable divorce. It might not always be possible if the other party feels very differently, but the attorney that you hire is going to be key. And so, well, you want an attorney who can go to court. You want an attorney who has a collaborative mindset. And so those are the kinds of questions that you ask about how their cases break down, how they handle certain situations. And I've had clients with attorneys who have more fight in them than my client has. And yet I've also had clients who are so afraid because their attorney is simply being assertive, not aggressive, but they see it as aggressive because they're scared. And so I would say that you really want to understand, right? There's mediation, collaboration, litigation. What's the best path for you? And then within that path, um, get clear on what you're experiencing. So let's assume there's a baseline that they're experienced and they know the law and strategy. So now it becomes a personal thing. And so the questions that they ask you, the way that they respond to you, uh, and their customer service approach, like that's a really important one. I would always ask, what's the turnaround time for you to get back to me if I put a phone call in or an email in? Because the worst thing in the world is when you think you have a crisis, whether or not it's a legal crisis, and 2 or 3 days has gone by and you haven't heard, like you feel so low on the totem pole. So those are some of the keys, is to really, you are interviewing this person to take on a job that's a super important job in the future of your life. Make sure that you go in with a list of questions, that you're very attuned to their behavior. And I often encourage, bring a friend or a family member, because it's emotionally overwhelming and you may not remember their answers and you may not remember to ask all your questions. And so having a support person can really set you up for a very successful attorney-client relationship.
Oh, I think that's such a great takeaway of having your support person with you. And it's true, your mind is going to be flooded. You're going to miss details. It's always easier when you're the third party looking in and you're not entrenched in the story.
Yeah.
Has there ever been an occasion where you've sat at the table, your clients are ready to go to litigation, like it's hot, and then there was a pivot or a surprise or something in some way evolved and was able to not go to court?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had one client seemed to go on for forever. It was very complicated. It was high net. There was a trust fund. One of the parties was a trust fund person, and my client was hyper sensitive. She was scared. She was very ADHD. And so the attorney actually asked me to come and sit at the settlement table with them in the hopes that I might help them hear what was really being said. And it was amazing. It was this many-houred session where I could tell the moment my client was triggered, and nobody else could, because they were talking about the business of the divorce, and I could slow it down and say, and I didn't have to point that out. I just needed to say, can I reflect back to you? I want to make sure I understood what you're saying. And in this communication back and forth, and then a couple of breaks where I was able to sit with my client and find out what was her narrative, and was it true to what was actually going on in the room. And by the time we ended that night, to everybody's surprise, we had a locked and loaded full divorce settlement. And it was a real high for everybody, because when we entered that room, everyone was pretty far away from each other. And it was really kind of getting clear on misinterpretations and miscommunication and emotional dysregulation that needed to be kind of just calmed. And what could have blown up ended up being beautiful for both of them, and they were able to get on with the rest of their lives.
Oh, well, that is a wonderful note for us to come to a close today in our conversation with Karen McMahon, divorce coach, high conflict strategist, as well as the founder of Journey Beyond Divorce, and a podcast. Tell us, myself and our listeners, of where they can find you, the resources you have available, the services you're providing, and how they can find their own way through the hard journey beyond divorce, not just through it.
Yeah. I really encourage everybody, if you're able to invest in coaching support. What Karen and I do can really be a game changer and save a tremendous amount of money on your legal fees in the long run, and on your settlement in the long run. And so I have a team of a half a dozen coaches, myself included, from coast to coast. We pretty much coach across the English speaking world. And so we offer one-on-one coaching for people who prefer that. I have a Divorce 101 program for the early stages and all of the granular issues and decisions to get ready. We have support groups, coaching groups that we run. And then I will say I have a brand new free course that comes out tomorrow, and we're in mid-February right now. It's called Reclaim Your Mind, Evict Your Spouse from Your Mental Space. So how we started the conversation, if that resonates with anyone, you can go to jbddivorcesupport.com/reclaim your mind and just engage in this mini course that will be a game changer for you. And so our website is journeybeyonddivorce.com, and you can find our podcasts. We do series on high conflict and life after divorce and all things parenting. And I have a Karen Solos series that just gives quick coaching tips. So check us out, and wishing you the very best on your journey.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And we are chatting at the end of February in 2024, just for context, and as people look up those resources. But I know Karen McMahon and the Journey Beyond Divorce world is not going anywhere, and is so essential, over a decade strong. And what I want to remind all of you today, listeners, as you lean into this journey on your own, remember, everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end.
Thanks for listening. Do you have questions or thoughts about this week's episode? Let us know by following the Good Divorce Coach on Facebook and Instagram @Good Divorce Coach, and leave a comment. And be sure to tune in every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific, or listen anytime wherever you get your podcasts.